Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this talk. My name is, let us go. So the usual disclaimer applies. So Amit and I are going to talk about vCenter 5.0. We are product managers in the cloud infrastructure team, are responsible for various parts of vCenter. Amit looks after all of the GUI, the UI part. I handle the VC scale issues, multiple customers with multiple vCenters. I also look at our security and compliance and some of that part. So before we start, given that there are so many folks in the room, which is great, if you could have let's have all the questions after the talk is over. It takes about 40 minutes for this talk, and then we can have 20 minutes of questions. And one other thing, if you have any questions about VRAM, this wouldn't be the right place to ask because I really don't know much about it. So when we last talked, last year when 4.01 was introduced, we had kind of introduced a bunch of features both in vSphere and vCenter that kind of set the gold standard in virtualization. And you were able to offer a notion of quality of service for storage and networking. Because of improved power management, you could kind of offer cost savings in your virtual environment. There was features that helped you reduce downtime. You could boot from SAN. There was failover clustering, concurrent data recovery. And we had made scalability improvements, supporting 10,000 VMs per, that's vCenter. The vMotion speed had also increased. But a lot has happened in the last 2 years. And everybody's talking about cloud and cloud scale. And what does that exactly mean? So depending on who you ask, it means different things. So a few things most people tend to agree, which is the perception of the time it takes to get a virtual machine from the time you ask for it has come down drastically. So if you, as a line of business developer, wants a VM and within your organization it took you weeks or even months to get one, today you could potentially take your credit card and go to a public cloud provider to get that VM very quickly. So if you are an administrator who has to fulfill the need for a VM and you cannot do it in a very short time, then you become part of a problem as opposed to the solution. Right. The second thing is your business has grown. People talk about cloud and elasticity. Essentially, everything that's elastic needs to be backed by some physical infrastructure for it to be elastic. So your infrastructure needs have grown, and so you need to scale up sometimes very fast. The third thing that most people tend to agree on is the notion of SLAs, that not all your workloads are equal. Your Oracle, SQL Server, Exchange workloads are much more important than possibly your test dev workload. So you should be able to not only configure SLAs, be able to enforce them, monitor them, make sure these SLAs stand the test of time. So all of these things kind of have happened over the last 2 years. So depending on who you are in the data center, you have a different perspective, a different set of needs. So if you are the CIO, you want to maybe build a private cloud. Maybe you think that you really can drive efficiencies, or maybe because your CEO said go build a private cloud. You want more accountability, agility. The other thing, you want more bang out of your buck. You want to extract more out of your data center administrators. That's something that you always look forward to as a CIO. If you are a data center architect, the CIO just told you to go build a cloud. Now, what are the kind of things you're looking for? You have to design this whole thing, so you're looking for the right set of interfaces that helps you reduce the amount of code you have to put in. So you also need to architect for the future, to look at the increase in demand, availability, scalability, and all that stuff. You also need to architect for the different SLAs that'll come up from your lines of businesses. If you are the administrator, well, all of a sudden you're supposed to guarantee all of these SLAs. So and then you're expected to do more with each passing day. Remember, the CIO said he wants to achieve Google scale. So you are the person who's going to deliver him that. So yesterday, if you were managing 1,000 VMs, tomorrow you're going to manage 10,000 VMs. So suddenly you've got this huge workload on your hands. So if we take the needs of all of these players within a data center, it falls under the following themes. Essentially, the first one is resiliency. Within your data center, your workloads and your infrastructure has to be highly resilient. It cannot fail. The second thing is you want massive operational savings. If you want to deploy 20 new hosts and it took you 20 hours, probably that's not the right way to go about it. It should take you in the order of an hour or maybe less than an hour to deploy all of these hosts. You also need to be able to understand, handle SLA tiers, be able to configure SLA tiers, come up with your own SLA tiers, be able to monitor them and enforce them. The other thing is you need to be able to handle new types of workloads. You have a whole bunch of mobile applications these days. Almost every employee is roaming around with a smartphone. A lot of them have iPads, and they are expecting to run some of their corporate apps from these. And so your infrastructure needs to be able to handle those kind of workloads. And last but not the least, you always want a reduction in your capital expenditure. So it is in these contexts that we kind of introduced vSphere 5.0 in general and vCenter 5.0. In what we say in the journey towards IT as a service, vCenter 5.0 provides a set of features that lets you go to the next step, which is offer a cloud, whether within the enterprise or as a service provider, that not only meets your business needs, but is also agile and does the right things that people expect from a cloud. So instead of explaining or just going through a laundry list of all of the features of 5.0, we figured, let's create a very simple story around how would you build a cloud from, right from the beginning. And in the process of building that cloud, we will talk about how the new features of vCenter 5.0 help you along the way. So, because it's a slightly contrived story, the first thing you need to do is obviously deploy a vCenter because you're going to use that to kind of do the rest of your work. So let's see, we will talk about how vCenter 5.0 helps there. The second thing is, well, once you've deployed vCenter, you want to be able to deploy a large number of hosts very quickly. We'll talk about that. Then you want to set up your storage, your networking. Okay, now it's time to deploy your applications. And then we'll talk about, okay, now you've deployed your applications. We were not sure whether we should bring availability before the one, but at least we'll talk about, you've deployed your applications and then you'll configure availability. So let's look at, this deploying a vCenter and what's new there. Well, 5.0, we introduced the vCenter server appliance. Essentially, it's vCenter running on SUSE Linux. So a few things it does. Given that it's an appliance, it simplifies patching, it simplifies deployment. I mean, you could take all you need to do is import an OVF, and then within 10 minutes, you essentially have a vCenter running. It also streamlines patching and upgrades. And the fact that it runs on Linux obviates the need to buy an additional Windows license. Maybe you don't care about that because you have a site-wide license and you can use as many Windows instances as you want, but maybe you do care about it. So we've had a lot of customers who are completely Linux shops and who needed to use Windows just to deploy vCenter. So let's dig a little deeper into the server appliance. So as I said, it's a 64-bit application running on SUSE Linux version 11. It also comes with a built-in enterprise database. So right now, that database is DB2. The thing with that is, with that embedded database, you can support 5 hosts and 50 VMs per host. Now, if you want to use the server appliance and you have a much larger number of hosts and VMs to manage, you could do one of two things. You could connect it to your external database. And today, out of the box, it supports Oracle. SQL Server is not yet supported. That's something we plan to add very soon because we've had quite a few customers telling us about that. So the other thing is, once you set it up, all you need to do is point a browser to it and you configure it. It's also connected to Active Directory, so your corporate you can log into it with your corporate identity. And last but not the least, given that it's a virtual machine, you could use VMware HA to make it highly available. So people will ask this question: should I go the appliance route or should I not go the appliance route? And the first comment I'd have here is that in terms of performance, scalability, and all of that stuff, we made sure that it is exactly like vCenter running on Windows. So there should not be any difference from that point of view. The advantages are obviously, as I mentioned, you can upgrade very easily. It comes with an embedded database, so if you are a small or medium business that does not have a lot of hosts and VMs, you may not want, and you don't have to, and you're not already invested in a database, you could just go ahead and use this. On the roadmap, so as I said, SQL Server support does not exist today, but we will add it very soon. Linked mode support. Now, one of the reasons is in the Windows version of vCenter, we use linked mode is kind of enabled by Atom. Now, Atom is a Microsoft technology that doesn't work on Linux, and we're trying to get rid of that. So once that happens, linked mode support will also come in place. And the other thing is IPv6 support. We'll make sure we do that as well. So our intention is to have the VC on Linux as good, or if not better, than the VC running on Windows. Are we there today? Well, there are some gaps there. But to a lot of folks, if you're really not big, then linked mode probably doesn't really matter to you. So you wouldn't care about that. And I'm not sure other than how many people care about. So can I have a show of hands as to how many people care about IPv6, that they insist that their environment be IPv6 compliant? Okay, it's good to know. So probably 3% of the people care about IPv6. Yeah, but it is on our roadmap, and we'll make sure, because as I said, it's going to be at feature parity with VC on Windows. Okay, so now that we've set up a vCenter fairly quickly, let's go ahead and deploy some hosts. So as I said, if you are, there are multiple scenarios, right? You're starting a new cloud and you have to kind of virtualize, let's say, a lot of your workloads, and you need to bring up 20 to 30 hosts, or it might be a situation where your infrastructure is already virtualized and there's been a sudden spike in growth and you need to add additional hosts to provide the virtualization infrastructure environment. So it is in this context that we introduced the auto-deploy feature. It allows you to rapidly deploy hosts, especially if all these hosts are supposed to look and feel the same, have the same configuration. It is very simple to deploy a very large number of hosts very quickly. You could reduce the time of deployment of 20 hosts from, say, 20 hours to literally 20 to 30 minutes. And using the same technology, you can also do very fast patching. So we'll just kind of demo how this thing works, a pictorial representation. So let's say you have an empty, a piece of x86 hardware. So you have an image, an ESXi image that you'd like to install. So once you've installed that image, you essentially have a vSphere hypervisor. Now you configure that to your needs. Let's say you're very security conscious and you want to disable SSH, things like that. So you configure this to your needs, and based on that, you kind of create a profile of that ESXi host. Okay. Now you can save that profile, and that's your host profile. So now, using a combination of the image profile and the host profile, you essentially have another vSphere instance that looks and feels exactly like the first one. So you can do that to a third one, and a fourth one, and a fifth one, maybe 20 more. So you just create, have an image profile and a host profile, and deploy it across as many hosts as you want. So the next thing is setting up storage. So here we've come up with some actually very new features that allows for a creation of storage profiles for VMs, and the other thing it does is allows for intelligent storage resource management. So essentially, the first thing is you can tier storage now, and that tiering allows you to assign, let's say, high-valued storage, gold storage, for example, something running fiber channel, backed up and replicated and things like that for your high-value workloads. Whereas for, let's say, your test dev workload, you can use storage that's not replicated, not as fast, things like that. We'll go into the details of these. So the first one, as I said, is the notion of profile-driven storage. You can create a storage profile. Let's say the profile is replication is true, capacity is greater than 2 terabytes, and disk type is fast, so the fiber channel type disk. And when you have a workload, let's say a Microsoft Exchange workload, you can say that this workload needs to be associated with this type of storage profile. And the underlying system will make sure that always assigns the gold storage to Microsoft Exchange workloads. On the other hand, if you have a test dev workload, you could have another profile where the data is not replicated, the speed is not as fast, and all your test dev workloads kind of gets assigned that profile. The next enhancement is the notion of storage DRS, what we call. So if you think DRS as it applied to compute, the same concept has been applied to storage. So storage DRS essentially allows for better storage management. And the first thing is allows you to pool resources, data store clusters. So once you do that, it helps you with the initial placement. So remember the profile-driven storage I said? Based on that, it will kind of assign it to the right data store cluster. It also takes care of out-of-space avoidance and I/O load balancing. So for example, if one data store in that cluster gets overloaded, you have storage vMotion happens to other data stores in the cluster. And the workloads move, and now it's back to normal. The other thing you can do is virtual disk affinity. So if you have two virtual disks and you insist that they should either be together or they should always be apart, you can kind of enforce that rule as well. So whenever it moves together. And the other feature is if a data store starts malfunctioning, then you have the notion of, you can put it in maintenance mode, where all of the storage from there will go to empty or ones that have space. And then, essentially, just like you put a host to maintenance mode and all the VMs can vMotion over to a healthy host. The same thing for data. And the last thing is you can add another data store and have VMDKs kind of move to that one. So as you can see with storage DRS, essentially all the things that you can do with compute and DRS, you can do with storage now. The last new feature with regard to storage is support for NFS in vSphere 5.0. Essentially, storage I/O control did not support NFS up until now. So if your VMFS is backed up in an NFS storage, then you could get the storage I/O control there as well. So if you have an online store or Microsoft Exchange, and you want that to take bulk of the I/O bandwidth, you could, using storage I/O control, you can make sure that that happens, and a data mining application that can possibly run, every once in a while, get access to data. You can control that as well. So you can control the width of the pipe, your storage pipe, by storage I/O control, and now it works with NFS as well. So Amit is going to come talk about networking and take us through the rest of this process of building a cloud.
Okay, I guess can you hear me in the back? Okay, no one's ever accused me of being quiet, so. Before we dive into setting up the networking, I wanted to take a moment here and pause and kind of relive some of these themes that we've been talking about, right? The first, and I think you've seen them in everything Deep has said, and you'll see it going forward in everything we say here. Some of the key themes are making automation easier, right? As your data center gets larger and larger and larger, we need to make sure that you can automate and manage a larger and larger infrastructure. The second one is, and we'll say this again and again and again, all workloads are not created equal, and so you need to be able to create and enforce these kinds of SLA tiers. And the second is just getting transparency into your environment. As you start to create what we call this cloud, for whatever that loaded term means, you should be able to see what's going on. And that's exactly the kinds of features we've talked about and we continue to talk about. So in 5.0, we followed along exactly those themes in networking as well. So we introduced the VDS, the Virtual Distributed Switch, in 4.1. So we've continued to make progress on that in two ways. One is, again, network I/O control, which I'll talk about, and providing NetFlow visibility into your transactions on in your virtual environment. So prior to 5.0, well, what happened is any workload that would be running on a host was treated equally. Whether this was your business critical, let's take a hypothetical example, which may not necessarily be true, but that you're running some very business critical workload on your host, right next to your test and dev environment. And anytime there was network congestion, what you'd find is that everything suffered the same famine, right? And that's clearly not the way that businesses are set up to run today. Businesses need to say, hey, I need to make sure that these are my priority workloads, that they get what they need, and everything else can suffer, if you will. And that's exactly what we've done in 5.0. In 5.0, we've created this idea of creating shares and reservations. So you can assign priorities, in essence, to your high caliber workloads. So in this example, the online store and your email server should never suffer or suffer far less than anybody else in times of famine, if you will. And so you create high reservations and assign them high shares, and everything else can be lower. And when this network congestion comes, your workloads do not suffer. The second one is, and I think everyone knows what NetFlow is, right? The ability to see network traffic and source and destination and know where everything is going. We've provided that now same visibility into your virtual infrastructure. So previously, of course, it works in your physical infrastructure really well. We now say, hey, you can capture all your network information, your source, your destination, and feed it off to third-party collectors to do a lot of the analytics that go there. So you can see when traffic is outside of norm, what that traffic is, and where it's going. We've done exactly that, and we've done it in 3 different ways. The first one is we're saying we now provide full visibility into your host. So when you open up your host, you should be able to see how things are performing. When workloads are communicating with each other inside of your host, you get full visibility. When they're across hosts, so if you have communication across hosts, you should continue to get that visibility. And of course, I think most importantly, when you have your virtual infrastructure talking to your physical infrastructure, let's say hypothetically a database somewhere, you are now able to see how that traffic is and do the analysis on that. So now at this point, we've gone through and we've set up all of we've set up the vCenter, we've deployed our host automatically very quickly, we've set up our storage and networking. We've kind of done the infrastructure portion of this, right? This is the tax that you have to pay to get your infrastructure up and running. I think the most interesting part beyond this is now setting up your application workloads. You're saying, okay, now I need to get to the business critical stuff, the reason I spent all that money. And in this case, I think I was reading somewhere we added over 100 features in just this one domain. But the 2 that are most interesting to me, and I think to most everybody, is that we continue to focus on running what we call these tier 1 workloads in your virtual infrastructure. So we've always said they're important. They have always been important. But what we've done now is actually made it even more easier to run these tier 1 workloads in your infrastructure. And the second one is we say, okay, we realize that your data centers are not very close to each other, and you need to be able to move workloads all over the place whenever you need to. We've made that easier to do, and I'll dive into that. So for the record, this is not my picture, so I don't want any comments on that. But the key here is that your virtual machines are now 4 times larger than they used to be. And so if I were just to boil this down into one elevator pitch for you, the argument that some of our software vendors make that you cannot run tier 1 workloads in your virtual machine absolutely goes away. And to give you an example of what we mean, our bandwidth, our benchmarking that we've shown has shown that you can run almost 1 million I/O transactions per second with these kinds of metrics. So to break that down into a really practical application, that means a database can do over 2 billion transactions a day. That's billion with a B, in case my morning voice is confusing. So this need to say that you can't run tier 1 workloads anymore in your infrastructure, absolutely no longer true. And the second one is I want to talk about is our vMotion improvements. We've done a couple of things. Prior to 5.0, our vMotion latency was about 5 milliseconds. And if you were to translate that into distance, that equates to about 60 miles or so. So that means that if you're running a workload in your New York City data center, you could approximately move it to a data center in New Jersey. That's great for some, but it really isn't practical for those who have data centers spread out all across the country. So in my cheesy example here, I'll tell you what we did in 5.0. In 5.0, we've increased that latency to about 10 milliseconds, which equates to about 200 to 250 miles distance. So if, let's say, hypothetically, there is a hurricane coming down into Virginia, you can vMotion your traffic off to New Jersey, where it will hypothetically be safe for a few more hours. I realize in this example that's not any safer, but I will fix that for later discussions. I did this halfway through Irene, so I didn't realize where it was going. So anyway, and I think the final step is you've now created your infrastructure, you set up your business workloads. That's great, and you're up and running, but you need to now ensure, again, back to the themes that we've been talking about, that some workloads are very important to you, and you need to be able to make sure they're continuously available. And in that way, we've made 2 drastic improvements in terms of our availability story for your business critical applications. The first is we've been told, hey, workloads that are managed by my VC inside of my host are very important. It has to be very fast and very easy to set up an availability story there. And so we've done a lot of improvement around high availability. And the second is, and this was interesting to us, a lot of customers are now telling us, hey, VC is critical, the vCenter, excuse me, is critical to my business operation, my production environment, and I need it to be highly available all the time. And so we've made a lot of improvements with our Heartbeat product in that domain, so that your vCenter is a very enterprise-ready thing. I probably can fly through the slide really quickly, but for those who are unaware of what high availability is saying that there's lots of points of failure that could potentially exist. Your host, your VM, your OS. Anytime something goes down, you should be able to prioritize what these critical workloads are and then be able to move them to another host and be up and running very quickly. And of course, in order of priority. So with that little disclaimer, I just wanted to focus on some of the things we've done with high availability. So the main focus in 5.0 was around architectural improvement. This means a couple of things. This means that the system has to be more reliable. The uptime is far better this time. Setting it up is much easier. So where it used to take, I've heard the new number from our product manager on this is something like 10 minutes to set up high availability in most cases. And of course, the size of the clusters that we support are much, much larger. We can get that information to you. And so what this really boils down to is that we've improved our alerts and alarms. We've been told that, hey, these were kind of cryptic to me. I didn't really understand what this meant. Or they'd get lost in just a barrage of huge amounts of notifications. We've improved that. We've also integrated with syslog. And we've just, in general, fixed how we integrate and work with and being able to isolate where problems are occurring. The second one that I was talking about was your vCenter availability. So this is really the concept that says, hey, my vCenter is business critical. I need to be able to make sure that it's always available. My backup is running. So we've made 3 key improvements in this one. The first is you can now, for those of you who've used the product, you can now manage your primary and your secondary node together. So as you well know, your primary node is the VC that you use. Whenever you wanted to make changes, you'd have to go to your secondary one and make those changes separately. You can now do that simultaneously. So we've given you visibility into both of those things. This is good for things like patching and making sure everything is up and running. The second one is people are saying, hey, my vCenter is critical. I have to set it up in one window and then go to another window and actually use everything. We've solved that problem. We've really moved, and you'll see this as a theme and throughout the rest of this presentation, what we call single pane of glass. It should be very easy to go and manage your VC, manage the workloads running on your VC all in one place and very consistently. And finally, we've broadened platform support. So of course, vCenter 5 is now supported, as well as View Composer 5 and SQL Server 2008 R2. So there's a big platform broadening that happened there as well. So there is one last feature I'd like to talk about. And so when we talked about this presentation, we did it in this kind of very, very simplified lifecycle of putting together a data center for cloud scale. And we've walked through all of the features that are key in all of those things. But there are some features that are bigger and broader than that lifecycle. And one of the big ones that we've introduced in 5.0 is what we're calling our vSphere web client. For those of you who are, I'm guessing most of you are familiar with our VI client, the icon on your desktop that you click on in your Windows application. That still exists in 5.0. It's still your primary go-to to solve all of your problems. What you're seeing here is an introduction of a web client that focuses initially on VM use cases. So if you have a VM operator, somebody who needs to do consistent VM management, or someone who just wants to monitor the environment, the web client is an excellent way to start learning that. And of course, as we move forward, you'll see that the web client takes broader precedence as we go forward. So the question that often comes up is, why web client? Why did you change what works? I like my VI client. It's slow, but it's OK. It works. And there are 4 or 5 key reasons that we've made the changes. The first is scalability. The number of objects, when we say objects, we mean VMs and clusters and hosts that people are managing in their data center has exploded. And managing that within the traditional VI client that you're all used to is absolutely going out the window. And so you'll see, I have a couple of screenshots we can show of how managing that is easier. Scalability also refers to the number of concurrent sessions. So I've talked to a couple of customers a week ago, and they said, hey, you know, 3 years ago we had 5 VI admins. Today we have 55 VI admins, and that's a pretty small number. What they're saying is that, hey, my network guy now needs full access, my storage guy needs full access, my security person needs full access. These are just a number of concurrent sessions that are hitting the server that have increased, and we need to make sure that we can scale and manage very well all these things. And actually, to give you an example, I was talking to one customer in government who said he has 1,000 concurrent sessions that were going on, and so we need to make sure that we can scale to those kinds of limits. The other one is, and I touched on this previously, the common UI. You'll see a theme that starts with 5.0. I think Paul Moritz announced it kind of yesterday with this suite. But you'll see it really being pushed forward for the next few years, this idea of single pane of glass, and everything should look alike, act alike, be consistent and easy to use, and we really touched on that. And to that point, extensibility was a huge point in which we were focused on here. So we're saying not only should all VMware solutions look and act and behave alike, when you go into a client, you shouldn't be able to tell organizational boundaries by the way things worked. So if you wanted to use SRM, VC, and View, for example, our VDI client, it should all flow consistently together. And we also have a realization, as good as we think we are, we know we don't solve all of those problems, and partners definitely fill gaps for us. Partners also should be able to plug in and work alongside us. It should be intuitive. It should continue to look and act exactly like we do. So your storage vendors, your server vendors, when you click on a host, you should just be able to see their actions as easily as you see any VMware actions. And a surprising number of large customers are starting to build their own plugins for their junior administrators. We're finding that they should be able to plug in just as seamlessly. And then I think one of the other key ones, to just quickly go through these, are platform independence. For people who are Linux shops, and I've met a lot of you, you get very angry at me when I come to meet you, and you say, why do I have to run a Windows machine to use the client? We've gotten rid of that. If you have a browser that works, you can now use our client, the web client. And I think finally, the big one here is upgrade. I was talking to a pharmaceutical who said he had 250 clients distributed throughout the environment, and anytime he needs to upgrade his VC, he has to go through all 250 machines to upgrade that. I don't need to sell you on the value of web tier technology, right? But you inherit the web architecture kind of value when you say, I can upgrade my server, and everybody now has the new client. So it's that simple. And the final one is not really a theme, but it is something I want to touch on, and it's something I hear very often around the web client. And that is that there were some non-starters we had that we had to have successfully before we would introduce the web client. One is performance. Performance had to be as good and, frankly, better than the VI client. So for those of you who use a VI client, I've heard from many of you who have something called the white screen of death. You click on an object, and then you can go to lunch and come back 10 minutes later or an hour later, and it's still rendering all the objects. That problem has to go away. Your login time has to go away. You can't wait 10 minutes to log in. We've gotten rid of all of those problems. And the other key here is that we're not looking at a Web 2.0 kind of paradigm, right? This is not a Facebook app, and we're aware of that. This has to be an administrative tool that looks and feels like an administrator tool. So think of this as a rich internet application, not some kind of Web 2.0 application. And so just a quick few screenshots here. For those of you who use a VI client, this shouldn't look drastically different, right? You still continue to have your 3 panes of information, your inventory tree on one side, your summary and information in the middle, your management pane, and then your status bar here on the right-hand side. So you can still manage your infrastructure as you're familiar with. Your monitoring information is still there. You can still use it as an ops tool, not as a complete ops tool, but to manage your infrastructure, you can see all the information. And I just wanted to quickly touch on one last thing before we move off this topic. We talk about cloud scale. What's happened, and Deep spoke about it, and you see it as a theme here, that the cloud is, your data center has just exploded, and you have so much information to manage, it's actually quite overwhelming. The key goal of the client has to be to abstract a lot of that complexity away so that you see only what you need to see, and when you need to dive into it, you can dive into the details later, wherever you feel you need to. So an example of that here is, you can see when you click on a host, you have 107 virtual machines. Most administrators tell us, I don't need to see all 107 machines, I just need to be updated how many are there. And if something is wrong, if one of the VMs is not great, surface that here too. But don't force me to have to sit there and wait for everything to render in that inventory tree. And those are the kinds of problems we'll see, and that's where you see a lot of the performance improvements. And of course, if you want to dive in and see that, you can certainly do that. So before we take questions, I think we have a few minutes for questions, I just wanted to touch on a few things. Listening, just to summarize what we've been talking about, listening to Paul's speech yesterday actually made me feel pretty good. I don't know if this is the horse leading the cart or the cart leading the horse, but we actually ended up stealing most of his themes without realizing we were stealing his themes, right? And everything we've touched on in VC5 is exactly around that. VC5's goals have been to make sure that your workloads are resilient. You need to make sure that they're available, they're scalable. We understand that I was actually, just to give you a perfect example around operational savings, I was talking to one company maybe 6 months ago who said, my typical data center administrator today manages 1,000 VMs. By the end of 2011, they need to manage 8,000 VMs without growing the number of staff I have. So those are the kinds of scale growth that we're talking about that VC needs to be able to manage. The third is, and I've said it before, and I'll say it, and we'll say it 100 times later, all workloads are not created equal. Some workloads are just more important than others, and you have to be able to enforce and manage all of that. I think Deep talked about new workloads. Those are new workloads that your end users are bringing to you, that your developers are bringing to you, or that your paradigm of viewing it is, right? You need to be able to see things in your mobile apps and your iPads and your Android tablets. And of course, reducing CapEx is always a theme. So that's kind of the high-level overview of VC5. We'll be more than glad to open it up to questions. We have a couple of VMware people here that maybe want to come on stage, and we can take some of the questions that you have. But that's it. Yeah, if you want to step up to the microphone, that way everyone can hear.
If you could step to the microphone.
Hello. Hi, my name is Vladimir, System Administrator at Hawaii Pacific University. I heard that VMware 5 has virtualized storage. So essentially you can combine local storage from a couple of hosts. Is it possible to do storage vMotion between SAN and the local storage? And how does the virtualized storage work exactly in version 5?
So the virtual storage, I guess, it's kind of addressed towards the SMB segment in the market. So if someone has 4 or 5 servers and they don't have, they don't want to buy a separate SAN, they can just these 4 or 5 can be kind of collectively shown as a single storage layer, and within that you can do vMotion. So there's a 3-node limit. I'm not sure whether you can do vMotion between that and I'd have to refer you to the storage guys.
Sounds good.
Sorry? Within your VSA. Yeah, within your VSA you can do vMotion, but outside of that, I really don't know the answer.
Sounds good. Thanks.
I have a question for you. Installing Composer on the vCenter virtual appliance, supported or not supported?
Not supported today, but the goal of the appliance is complete parity, so that it will be coming, but that's not supported today.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi. You mentioned HA and FT as being supported. What are some of the constraints that an application has to follow before it can take advantage of the HA and FT?
What are the constraints?
Can I just take any old app and make it work correctly under FT? I thought there were some constraints.
No, if you can put your app in a VM, then you can do HA.
Okay, and how about FT?
The same thing, right?
Same thing, so no constraints?
Yeah, the only constraint that still remains is this uniprocessor.
Oh, uniprocessor.
Yes.
Do you have plans to extend that? Is it on the roadmap?
That's being actively investigated.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to follow up on that Composer question. Do you think, you said it's going to come up and be added. Do you think it's going to be added when the new version of Vue gets released, or like a year out kind of thing?
That's a roadmap discussion. Maybe we could find you afterwards and have some brief discussion.
Yeah.
You talked about NetFlow analysis into the virtual switches. Does that require the virtual distributed switch, or can you do that with a standard vSwitch?
You can do it with the standard vSwitch.
You can do it with standard vSwitch. Yeah.
How soon do you expect to see the VI client pretty much go away and go just to the web client for management?
So the problem here is, we have a set of customers who've said that give us some time to kind of, because it's a UI thing for us to kind of move our mind completely to the VI client. So I think.
Well, maybe I can answer your question slightly differently. There will be a period of time where they coexist. I don't know. Maybe we can talk later offline. I can give you some more detail. There will be a period of time where they coexist.
I'm anxious to get to the full web version, so I'd be more inclined to leave the past behind.
Okay, that's coming very soon then, so that we can help you with right away.
Very good. Yes.
Does auto-deploy host profiles require Enterprise Plus?
So I didn't hear you.
Do you need Enterprise Plus licensing to use auto-deploy?
That's correct.
You do still?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned 10K VMs is the maximum limit of vCenter. In 4.1, you were supported 10K VMs plus 5K VMs that were powered down. Is that still the case?
Yes, yeah. 10K powered on and 15K
total. Again, do you have plans to extend that or actively investigate it?
Yeah, scalability is always a topic we're always pushing forward over time.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I can't give you numbers, but you can always look forward to things moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Are the disk limitations gone now, the 2 terabyte limitation?
It's 64 terabytes now.
On VMDKs, you could only have a 2 terabyte LAN.
Yeah, it's 64 now.
It is?
But let's, can you give your email address? We'll find it and send it to you. I think it's 64 because somebody asked the same question yesterday, and Justin was there. Really? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm not completely sure on that, so I don't want to. Yeah.
Let's not give you misinformation.
Yeah, we don't want to. So maybe if you give your email address, I can get the answer from the right guys and send it to you. Just why don't you hold it?
Yeah, for limits of that sort, we have a document called the Configuration Maximums document, which you can just Google for. And there's a new version 5.0 published, and all of the maximums are what you can find in there.
Yeah.
With the Linux version of vCenter, are you going to be supporting Postgres for the database?
So you're not the first person to ask that question. Lots of people have been asking, so we're kind of thinking about that. We will, if it happens, we'll definitely we'll talk about it. So okay. Yeah, it is in our mind. We're thinking about it. Yes.
So just to be clear, it sounds like vCenter for Windows is going away. Is that right? It's not.
No.
That will still be there in version 5 as well?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Because what I was trying to get to the bottom of was understanding really what the value proposition is for Heartbeat if you're going to pretty much be virtualizing. I understand, obviously, the database sync.
So vCenter Windows is going to stay. We haven't end of life that. That is perfectly there, and that works. Yeah, that's going to be there. Okay. So we have a lot of customers running vCenter on Windows and virtualized as well.
All right, we're continuing that down the road.
Yes.
I have two questions about the KVM console in the new web client. The first question is, does one still need a plugin for the KVM console, and what platforms does the plugin support? And the second question is, does the browser still need to be able to have a direct connection to each of the ESX hosts that it wants to open a KVM console to? Because that was the case in the virtual client 4.1.
So I can answer, the answer to your first question, which was, do you need plugins and do plugins support? The answer is yes, but the goal is when this becomes the full client to have all the plugins available. And the plugin is available for just Windows, or does it support other platforms? Well, it'll be available on all platforms for the direct-to-host. Okay. Yeah. And their second question was the second question was when you open a KVM console to a VM, you need to be able to make a direct network connection from the browser or from the plugin to the ESX host where this VM resides. Is that still the case, or can you tunnel it through the virtual center host? Today, I believe
I think it's more and more tunneling through virtual center. That's the general exact direction. Answer I would not like to tell you, if it's not true, but from what I heard, all of these things, we are trying to make the ESX, less and less direct interaction with ESX. So that means you go through virtual center, and if that means the tunneling is through, that probably means that, but I can't tell you exactly. We'll have to find that. If we get your email, I can tell you that. I'll send you an email.
Okay. Thank you.
In the next version of Virtual Center, is NFS traffic, is that fully viewable within Virtual Center?
The NFS?
NFS traffic.
NFS traffic?
Yes.
Not that I know of.
Okay, it's still, within Virtual Center, you still can't go to like statistics and see the NFS traffic between your hosts and your VMs.
I don't know the answer. Maybe you can, but I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. There is a storage session. If you could go to that one, they'll surely be able to answer that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Alok Guha from Vizsla. A question on storage support in vCenter. So 2 parts. One, when you showed the real setting up those clusters, those data store clusters, you showed a way of supporting tiers. How are you specifying the tiers? You said capacity, but I didn't say anything about performance. So you showed gold, silver, bronze.
Right.
I mean, I could have tier 2 storage with high capacity. Where do you specify a tier 1?
So when you define the tier as an administrator, that's where you set up all of these parameters that defines a tier.
So it's totally subjective to the admin who sets it up?
That's right.
Yes. So what happens is, we have an interface. I guess it's called VASA.
Yep.
And all storage vendors implement that interface. But essentially that allows you to the administrator to create a profile that defines a tier.
So vCenter doesn't initiate or support the VASA? How does it work? I actually sat through Satyam Vagani's talk yesterday, as well as the SDRS. I'm trying to see how that gets instantiated
vCenter
inside
is the
this.
conduit through which the administrator manipulates storage.
So does this launch VASA then, or where does that get
This
specified?
calls that, yes.
Okay, same question then, related question on SDRS. Where is that initiated?
Again,
I mean,
from
you
vCenter.
showed SIOCTL, right?
Yeah.
That's already implicit in the network level. How does it interact with SDRS?
Through the vCenter.
Through so they are totally running orthogonally, or do they work together?
Which one? The
SIOCTL at the network level, from the VM down to the storage, to the data store, and
the network, you mean the profile-driven storage, that one?
So there are two parts that I'm trying to figure out in performance. One, there is SIOCTL, right? There is SIOCTL, I can allocate different priorities.
Yeah, the storage I/O control.
How does that interact with SDRS?
I don't know the answer, really.
But do you see my question? I'm a little confused because there are different approaches to managing
the I/O control. The I/O control is used so when you create the tier, your I/O control is one of the factors that is used to set that tier.
Okay, and then how does
then the tier and storage DRS uses the tiering. So it's like I/O control, tier, then the storage DRS. One uses the other.
And not according to the algorithms that Gulati and others are using it. How do I verify that? I need to kind of dig into
there
that.
is a session I think we have. So if you
no, I actually attended DRS yesterday.
You attended the 1,
storage
8, 2, 3?
DRS.
Okay.
Yes. So I think the answer we should get you in touch with.
Because they didn't mention SIOCTL, so I'm trying to figure out how they interact.
So maybe we should take your email and kind of get you in touch with the right people.
Is Gulati here?
Yeah.
I don't know who's Gulati.
All right, I'll take it offline.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The performance of the actual console when you're consoling into a VM server, has that gotten better in 5, or is that pretty much the same as it's always been? And then the follow-up with that is that obviously we know from the View platform with the PC over IP that you obviously have the ability, to basically do that very, very well. And so is that on the roadmap to possibly, use some of that technology to improve the performance of the remote in that console?
So the second question, I won't speak specifically about roadmap, but as everything, we start to integrate everything. So you'll start to see that the View client also lives side by side with your VC client.
Okay.
In the single pane of glass. We start to share the technology, and we do best of breed in that case.
Okay. So right now it's basically the same on 4.1 as it is on 5, performance-wise?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
But that changes going forward. Okay. That's what we're evaluating.
Yeah.
Hi. Have you re-architected the performance charts, like the overview tab? We quite regularly have issues where the web service crashes, or there's a Java exception, that sort of thing. I've raised a few support calls. Is that still going to be the same?
Yeah, so we are actively working towards that. And this particular release, you won't see any change, but you should see that sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.